I shall bring unto thee a grim reminder that all things must rot.
And welcome back to Devlog. In the last part I worked on combat complexities and the beginning of combat state systems, and in this part I work on the on-ground attack strings and attack combos for the player. The first thing I did was recontextualize and reorganize the way attack frame data works. Now all it does is derive information from a list of possible frame datas of when an attack should be made or when a force should be made, and applies the relative force or attack system at the relative time of this list. This basically makes it so that one attack can play multiple different attacks at the same time, or at different times, or one after another. Say if you stabbed forward and then stabbed behind you. All I really did was make one system work multiple times based on an array. I then worked on the attack hitbox setup. The way attack hitboxes worked in the start was it used a range for each weapon and each attack based on the character, and it only hit in front of you because it was on basic terms. Now it uses a range modifier and each attack itself based on the frame data, so each framed attack could have a different hitbox type. Each frame attack could have a different hitbox type based on what it was hitting. So now attacks can hit in front of us, to the left of us, to the right of us, behind us, at top of us, below us, at the center of us, or at a different handle. The handle for now is just the end of the sword, which actually makes for some pretty dynamic hitbox things, but in the current game system, most enemies are going to be sizable enough in design that you having a precise hitbox isn't really going to matter. As long as you relatively hit somewhere near it, that's good enough for me. But this leads the way for design complexity, where enemies can have different moving hitboxes or dynamic hitbox changing or warping or things of that nature. For example, a giant big monster that has a big hitbox it throws at you, like a big meteor attack or something like. I then worked on the actual attack animations and attack systems for each specific attack. This is very complicated because I made a lot of attacks and they all work in very oddly specific ways, so this video might get a bit long in the tooth as I explain each of these attacks. I'll try and explain their points now of what each attack does as we're viewing them in animated form, and also the basics of the attack animation and its design, and then later on when I talk about the attack strings in general and how that works, I can more detailedly talk about a few specific examples of each attack. But I'm just going to record these in the order that I did animate these for, so these attacks might be a bit out of order. The first animated attack was the sidestep. This is you jumping to the side. You trigger this attack by doing... I'm looking towards my notes to look at what the attack input for this is. In between a combo of light attacks, if you hold left and press a light attack, you will do a sidestep, or right and do a light attack, and you will do a sidestep to the right. These are two different animations, but they do the same thing. You either move left or you move right. While being classified as an attack, this doesn't do any damage, so we don't have any swinging attacks, and this is mostly used as a follow-up setup for other attacks. This is to do with the design for the current weapons that I'll get onto in some points. But the current weapon having a lot more mobility, so some of the attacks move you around in dramatic ways. The sidestep just moves you left or right. It has a nice jump, it has a nice weight. I like how it looks. It's a very simple attack, but I think it conveys you jumping towards the sides pretty easily. This is sort of a way to both dodge out of the way of enemies, but also set yourself up for a future attack. Similar to the dodge sidestep, we have the dodge backstep. This works in the exact same way as the dodge sidestep, only if you're pressing backwards while after an attack input and making a second attack. You will do a backwards attack. This is you diving backwards and doing a nice little backflip. This may look similar if you have played Breath of the Wild, because I just ripped off the animation because I liked how it looked. I'm pretty happy with how this animation looks overall. I think it turned out very well. It has nice weight to it, but it also has a nice fun movement to it. Just overall, happy with this animation. It's more of the sillier ones. This animation itself was just the same as the side steps. It's just the mobility option to set yourself up for different attacks. We then had the slide kick, which is one of my favorite attacks that I made. It has no logical sense of why the sword and shield weapon archetype would have this attack string listed in it, but I just wanted to do the slide kick because I thought it was funny. This is you making a specific attack input while sprinting, so this is like your running attack. Basically, you slide along the ground and you kick at any enemies that you may hit. This attack is very quick. It has a very slow, it has a very quick startup time and a quick finisher time. It's a very fast attack, hence why it's an attack you make while running. It's a very quick attack. It might not do the most damage, but it makes you move very quickly, so it could also be a mobility option for this weapon being high on mobility. If this attack animation looks similar, it's because it's the attack animation that Richter uses for his slide attack in Castlevania, the one you play as Richter. I don't remember Castlevania's names, they all have convoluted names. It's the one you play as Richter. He has a slide attack very similar, and it is basically the same attack function, only with one difference. The difference being that once you hit an enemy with this, it transitions into the... Wait, I'm looking at my notes as to what I called it. The kick flip. If you have an impact with this animation, the slide kick, or the next animation, the kick vault, which I'll get onto, you trigger into the kick flip. This is you kicking off whatever you impacted with, going up, backwards, and landing back on the ground. Again, another movement option, so the slide kick is moving close to an enemy, the kick flip is hitting them, and then flying backwards. However, if you are doing a slide kick and make another input, you will interrupt your slide kick with a vault kick? Is that what I named it? It is. This is you diving into the air with your slide kick. You can do the exact same input in Castlevania, the one where you play as Richter. This is just you diving into the air with the kick flip. If you want more aerial mobility with your dive kick, you can use this attack. This has the exact same functionality as the dive kick, as in if you hit an enemy, you will do damage and then also do the kick flip off them, making you fly backwards in a big looping motion. Once again, I just made this animation because I thought it would look cool. We then have the approaching slash, which I cannot think that I will actually have that name in the final game, but I can't think of anything else to call it. Running slash? Yes, that's almost assuredly better. This is an attack where you walk forward, slash upwards, and then land on the ground. And this attack is special because it made me remake the entirety of my combat system to not rely so heavily on substate systems. The reason for this is, if you look at the animation, it has 3 specific different types of movement options, meaning that each of these would have to have its own movement option or substate system if I was using the old setup of use of combat. This being the character walking forward and then slashing upwards and then falling back down after their attack is finished. Because of this, I had to rework the way combat is handled in the game, so that now it is more specifically to do with each specific attack state, being the readying, swing, and recall has its own motion and movement set to it based on individual values and can also enter or exit in specific ways. But I will get onto that when I talk about that section later in the video. But for now, this attack is it's pretty good. You do a big jump and a big swing, and I like it. This attack has a follow-up, which I'm not sure what input this is. I'm sure future me will have figured it out. It's only Tuesday, and I hope I'll have planned it. The follow-up is the jumping walk slash. This is after you have made your input. You can then make another input, and you will do a similar attack, only you will dive into the air and actually leave the ground as you make this attack. I like how this animation looks. It does have a little bit of jank to it, I think. I think part of the animation doesn't really convey what it is doing, or the motion for it, or some parts are a bit too quick. So I might, in the future, update this animation to look a bit more fluid. But for now, this is the animation we are currently working with for the jump, approaching, slash. I guess this animation would be pretty good if the enemy was further above you, or the hitbox you want to hit is further above you. This is just a nice little upwards mobility option for the player, and maybe this will have a follow-up. Who's to say? The next attack animation I did was the forward step animation. This is the animation from if you're going to a back step and then a follow-up attack, it will be a forward step. So you dive forward and you slash your weapon. This one has a little bit of an oddity to it in the delayed time for your timing of slashing the weapon is very delayed. As in, you're diving through the air for quite some time before you actually stab your weapon. The reason for this is because the idea is that this is a follow-up attack for a backstep, so you're already backing away from an enemy, so your diving forward to attack again is going to be delayed before you can actually attack again. This attack is the most that I'm probably going to change in the future because I'm just needing to test how this actually works in-game as to if this attack is even viable or if the timing is so much so that the attack will never actually land on anything, but that remains to be seen. This attack is also inspired by one boss fight from No More Heroes 3, but I won't tell you which one it is. The next attack is the upper spiral attack. This is you jumping upwards, spinning upwards, and then letting go. I quite like how this attack looks. It's the kind of obvious aerial attack to get your character in the air, but also damage enemies. It's Link's up B. It's, I quite like it. I think it turned out pretty well. It looks a whole lot better in engine with the actual weapon trails. I say before I have actually tested that, I'm just assuming it will look better when I have a weapon trail going around it in a circle. There is an alternate version of this attack as well when you started in air. This is essentially just a different startup animation, but the rest of the attack is the exact same. The attack is spinning around in a circle, hitting all the enemies around you in a circle, doing damage to the enemies in a circle. I think this animation looks okay. It could have a little bit of tweaking, I think, for some of the bodily motions, but overall I think it's a pretty decent animation of conveyance of attack. Animation, spinning. The next attacks I had to talk about are the shield bash animation attacks. Mwah, chef's kiss, 10 out of 10. Cannot get enough of these animations. Here's a little slug fact for all of you. I have a massive fondness for any piece of media or video game or anything ever where a character has a sword and a shield and their mode of attack is to whack the enemy really hard with the shield. It is always 100% the best. I adore this option. This is why I made so many shield bashing attacks with the sword and the shield instead of actual blocking attacks. I think the idea of using your shield to just hit the enemy really hard with the shield is always fun. I love it. It's a big bonk attack. It just hits the enemy with the shield. It's so much fun. So there's, I think, 3 different sword and shield attacks where you just hit the enemy with the shield. And this one is the heavy version. This is you moving backwards, crouching forward quickly but going into a downward pose and then boosting yourself up, whacking the enemy with the shield really hard in the temples until they die. This is another just very quick, very heavy attack. This attack is probably going to be one of the heavy attack strings, so maybe if you're in between a heavy attack and you press both inputs at the same time, you'll follow up with a shield attack. The shield attack, the idea behind these is that they would be less damaging, but they are more of a blunt force stunner attack if I had something like this. So for example, just hypothetically, I haven't planned any of this apart from the idea that they would be a stunner, but hypothetically, let's say you hit an enemy with a blunt force attack more than a thrusting attack, and this over time will lead the enemy to be stunned, but it deals less damage. So if you're using your stun attacks more, you would be able to stun the enemy and then follow this up with your more damaging slashing attacks in the future once the enemy is stunned. For example, maybe, depending on how I design this, who's to say? In summary of this attack, big heavy shield attack, funny, good. The next attack is the shield bash light. Have you played Dark Souls? Do you know what the parry attack is? It's just this. This is pretty much just looks like the parry attack from Dark Souls, because that's what I used as a reference image, because I couldn't really think of anything else to use for reference imaging for this. So it kind of looks more like a parry. This is a more light attack with your shield. You just bonk the enemy lightly this time. Just a big ol' bonk with your shield. Once again, pretty much the same as your heavy attack with the heavy shield hits. This is a lighter version, so maybe heavy attack string into light button press instead of both button press would be a light shield attack, for example. But that's pretty much what this is. You just hit the enemy with your shield. It's a much quicker attack. It would do even less damage. It's just faster. The next attack on my big old list is the upper pierce attack. I don't remember what this attack is. I think this attack is the thrusting your sword very quickly upwards and then falling back down. This kind of serves the same functionality as the spin attack, where you're going an attack straight upwards. Not 100% sure if I'm going to use this attack. It's a pretty good player launcher attack of firing them up into the air, but it also has an overlapping function with the up spin attack, so I'm really not sure what this could be used for. Maybe in the back step, but that wouldn't really make sense because you're deliberately moving away from an enemy, so having an attack that just moves you straight up, which wouldn't really make sense. Maybe the forward step into another forward step would be an upwards thrust like this. Yeah, I have no idea what this attack is going to be used for. It's also the most basic attack, with being more pose to pose. This attack may be completely unused. Shrug, who's to say? The next attack is the air dive down. There are two of these. There is air dive down normal, air dive down diagonal. These are you using an aerial input, so these are one of the, I think, 2 in-air inputs that I have designed for the sword and the shield. This is because, as I said, I haven't done the aerial inputs. Yes, these are more just ground inputs, but I had the idea for these animations, so I wanted to do these. These are your ground pound equivalent. You do a slight little adjustment, and then you move in a direction completely downwards, or forwards and downwards, depending on what your attack was. So if you use the input while not pressing forward, you go straight down. If you use the input while pressing forward, you go diagonally down. These are pretty good. I like these attacks. They're very similar to the slide forward attacks, where you just move in a direction and you hit the enemy that you hit, and then you do damage. This is once again another very mobility based attack. These are quick moving attacks. You just do a very fast movement to a slash. Pretty good attack. The next attack is the air dive down recoil. This is if you hit an enemy, you thrust your sword into it, either if you're hitting them from the diagonal or the downwards direction. You then very quickly kick off them, and then you will spin backwards away from the enemy. This is not a combat attack, you don't do any damage, but if you hit something in your dive down attack, this is then going to push you away from them. Pretty happy with this one too. Has some nice motion to it, looks pretty good, is a fun attack. Full stop. The next attack is the shoulder bash attack. Mwah, again, very fun attack, fun to animate, fun to do, just overall good attack. I'm a big fan of this one. This is you whacking them really hard with your shoulder. Once again, implementing the theme of don't use your sword in these attacks, just hit the enemy really hard with your body. Again, would have the same functionality as the shield bashes, more of a stunner. It's just a fun attack. It's a very quick attack because I felt like a lot of the attacks were quite slow. So this one is a very fast input for hitting enemies. Looks cool, is cool, full stop. Again, just a good animation. The next is the round slash, which is ironically the first attack animation I designed, but one of the last few that I animated. This is you doing a follow-up for your light attack, so this is actually involved in the light attack string. At least at this point of design it was involved in the light attack string. You do your light attacks, after that you loop back to the first attack. After the first attack is played again, you loop into this attack, which is a more heavier spin around with your weapon. This is sort of the not going into the air version of the upward spin attack jump. Looks pretty good. I like it. It has a nice attack. It's a nice finisher for a light attack combo. Easiest attack to perform because all you do is press light attack 5 times and this attack happened. I think the spin around has a nice little bit of flow for how your attack is moving your character, and overall it looks pretty good. The next attack is the uppercut. The original design for this was just to go into an uppercut and then land on the ground, but that didn't have a nice little bit of flow to it, so now you do an uppercut and you also slam down on the ground again. So this is a doubly attacking attack. It attacks twice. This was mostly just because I had a design idea for an uppercut attack, and I thought it would vary up what the attacks were. Finally, we have a stab. The quickest attack, it's a stab. You stab the enemy. Next, we have the usage of the attacks in-game, as explained at some point of the video, because this is the last section I'm recording and I don't remember how I organized this. These attacks are made with specific inputs shown on the top right of the screen. When designing these attacks, I had a base idea for what they would follow into, for example the round slash being at the end of a combo, but for the most part I kind of just had made attacks that I thought would be fun and interesting to do, and then I organically arranged what attack would follow on from what. So the actual attack animations that I have in play here could be changed in the future to depend on what flows better, but I think it looks pretty good. I'm saying at the point where I haven't actually implemented what the attacks are and I don't know what the current attack strings are. I'm just trusting my future self had a good head on her shoulders on this one and didn't mess it up. Are you even viewing attack animations right now? Did I not even finish it? Who's to say? So since the attacks themselves are pretty complicated in some of the inputs you can have, I kind of wanted to design them in a way where you could learn a specific combo for your weapon, like, if you do a heavy into a light, into a backwards dash, into a both input, into a forward slide dash, that's the most optimal way of fighting the enemy. Or you could just hammer buttons at random. Both would have a similar result depending on the player. If a player doesn't care about optimization or specific combos, they can just hammer their weapons at random, or just press their light attack string and fight enemies that way. Or if a player is really in-depth and wanting to learn specific combos or specific attacks, they will be able to press attacks in a learned way and attack the enemies in the specific combos set up. And based on the functionality of each different weapon, that would lead the way for more advanced weaponry and advanced attack combos, etc, etc. So what I'm saying is that the weapon combos are designed in a way where a basic player could just hammer away at inputs and do something cool, or an advanced player would be able to learn what each attack actually does and how to optimally play each weapon. Isn't it funny that I added a sword and a shield and none of the attack inputs actually block attacks? That is because I am adding blocking in a future update, because it has to do with more of a parrying and perfect blocking mechanic for each different weapon. So each weapon, even if it doesn't have a shield, will have a ability to block, but is not actually a attack input or anything like that. It's its own unique thing, and that's why the sword and the shield cannot currently block attacks. It certainly isn't because I was too lazy to implement a blocking mechanic this week. It's because of my grand plan. I have learned a valuable lesson in making attacks this way, wherein I probably shouldn't make them all in one go and then work on importing them, because I am at this point in the present day, for me, halfway between importing all the animations and assigning their frame data and force data and everything of that nature, and I made too many animations and attacks because it's taking a really long time. I then worked on the complexity of the attack coding. As I mentioned during the animations, some of them made it so that the regular system for the attack states and substates didn't really work particularly well with some of the animations, so what I wanted to do instead was rework the way attack animations played out in-game when they're used by the player. One of these specifically was just the adaptive exit states and movement states from each attack. These being that each attack will now have its own logic for when it should leave each state, as well as a timer. The only one I have of these initially is if the player has entered the ground. So these are for attacks that, like dive kick, where you're in the air and the attack finishes once you hit the ground. So the way this works is now that the attack won't exit from its swing state until it hits the ground. These also have logic for breaking out of attacks if you've hit the ground, so if a player is using an attack and they hit the ground, then the attack will stop completely. This is another one of these systems that leads the way for the game to be exponentially more complicated with specific attacks, like attacks that would exit out once you hit an enemy, or an attack that would exit out once you hit scenery or when you get hurt, or specific things like that. So these just make the attacks substates from going from a swing to a recoil and readying at the beginning to be more complicated. Another thing I did was change the way attack force works. Now attack force can be set through any of the attack states, being the readying, swinging and recoiling, at specific times based on an array of values of when player will need to be added force. So these can be set with the frame data of each attack, like the one where you step forward, but this is mostly more complicated than most attacks will need, because most attacks are just going to be pushing you forward once you have swung the attack. But this is another one of these systems where it can just make some attacks and some movement states more complicated when you have each attack. Pretty much all I did was make it so that each state of an attack has its own logic behind how it should function, and then all the attack functions derive their information from this logic. It's basically just a cleaner and more complicated way of coding the attack systems rather than having specific substates, while some attacks, like the dash where you dash towards an enemy, is its own attack substate because that works on completely different movement mechanics. Essentially, to sum up, the regular attacks are more complicated in what they do, and substate attacks are going to be used for more complex, wholly unique attacks. I then worked on two UI implementations that you have probably been seeing throughout this entire video. The first one is on the bottom right to display the controller, current input and button presses. This is more for you, the viewer, so you can see what buttons I am pressing to make each attack. This is just a nice little visual to get this across. I just added it like the same with the state and substate systems on the top left. It just easily displays things on video to show what is happening, and also for me so I know what button was feedback pressed. This is more for you, the viewer, so you're welcome. But the main thing is on the top right of the view, which shows what current attack the player can make with each input press and how to make this. I originally made this as a debug thing for myself, so I could see which attack leads onto which when I was designing the attacks, so that I would logically know what attack can do what and what I can lead onto, and how each of these organically would play with the inputs. But I'm probably going to keep this in the actual game, and I will explain why. This visage of the attack inputs that you can make is inspired by the exact same system in Monster Hunter World, which I really enjoy, and I'm keeping it for pretty much the exact same reason that Monster Hunter World would have a similar system. Essentially being that in that game, when you're trying out a new weapon for the first time, they all work very differently and have different attack combos, so having something on the top right to display what attack combos you can make and what inputs with this weapon does really simplifies things for the player, so that you can know just what your attack does. This may not be as obvious for the sword and shield. No wait, it totally is. A great example of this is that using a regular attack string, most players might just press the attack button continuously to make an attack, but if you have the inputs on the top right, you can read that, wow, when I'm making this attack, it says if I hold backwards, I can make a completely different attack. I will try that now, and you can essentially view and learn what each attack does as you are using them. Generally, when it comes to game design things, I tend to prefer things that are less obviously telling the player what they can do, which this one is, where it's just a visual that says, here's what the player can do at this point, here's what the player can do at this point. Hey player, press the X button to do a spin. Things like that. I generally prefer a more organic method of teaching the player, or just a method where the player has a bunch of inputs and I say go nuts. But I think in terms of the current weapon complexity, this being the sword and shield, having some complicated inputs and complicated things you can do for attack combos, it could get a bit unwieldy and confusing to really figure out what each attack combo is just by experimenting with button inputs, because how would the player organically know that if they press the backwards control stick they would do a specific attack without experimenting a bunch? This way it just kind of simplifies the process of teaching the player in what I think is an okay system. But this is mostly in line for future updates when I add different weapon typings. If I just had the sword and the shield, I would probably find a better organic way of teaching the player what each of their inputs do or how to use the sword and the shield. But if I want a completely set of different attacks and different combat weaponry, then I would have to make a unique organic way of explaining that to the player for every single weapon type. And if I have more than, for example, 6 weapon types, that would get really complicated to have an organic tutorial for each of these weapon types that the player may not even use all of them of. So with the UI system, it's basically if the player wants to pick up a new weapon type, they will pick it up, they will see the inputs on the top right of the screen, they will say, wow, since this weapon fires bees out of it when I press the control stick in a circle, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna try it, that sounds cool. And then the player will know how to use the weaponry just very quickly. Is kind of what I'm wanting with this system. Also, in terms of how this works, because I completely got sidetracked of explaining the reasoning behind it, all this does is it looks at your current attack and its current follow-ups, or your base attack and its attacks you can make. It looks at all potential attacks that you can make based on your state and sub-state, because some attacks can only be made by your sprinting, etc, etc. And then it just displays each of these attacks with their name, their inputs that you press. This is with the UI visual of the 4-axis inputs, because I don't like controller UI where it just says the button, because I use different controllers and that's confusing. So it just has the highlighted of the 4-axis buttons, whichever one you press, this being light attack, heavy attack, or both. And then if it requires a stick input, it also has the left stick and the direction you would hold this relative to your character. So if it's pointed up, this is hold the control stick towards the character's front direction. That's a little bit confusing, because if the player is facing towards the camera, you would technically be holding down, but maybe I could organically figure out how to display that in a way that would make the axis input relative to the player's direction. But that aside, it pretty much is just displaying what your inputs are, displaying the name of the attack, displaying what to do, and then switching out when the attack is not the saved attack. Finally, I will talk about weapon design for a really long time. So originally I was going to add a bunch of different weaponry, hundreds of them, which would all be very similar and have very simple attack strings, but I didn't like that idea, because I like attack strings that are more complicated. So now the current system is probably going to be making very, 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 very detailed weapons with very, very detailed attack strings, and all weapons having their own unique gimmick. The downside of this is that I'm probably going to, instead of having hundreds of weapons in the game, which I'm pretty sure I never even mentioned to you that was the original plan, but it was the original plan, the weapons in the game are probably going to be between 6 and 12 unique weapons, and they will all function completely differently. This is going for more of a quality over quantity approach. A good example would be the Monster Hunter weaponry variety compared to a Dark Souls game, or for a more make-sensey approach, the Bloodborne weapons compared to the Dark Souls weapons. In Bloodborne you have a very small amount of weaponry that you can have. There's not a huge amount of weapons in the game, maybe under 20. 14, I'm going to guess and say. Well, in Dark Souls you have hundreds of different weaponry. The difference is, in Bloodborne you pick up a new weapon and it controls pretty much exactly, completely different than every other weapon in the game. There's very few weapons in Bloodborne that have an overlap in mechanics. They all have a very unique style to how they function in game, what their attack strings are, what their switch attacks are. They're all very different, they're all very unique. In Dark Souls, you pick up one sword and it's pretty much the same as every other sword. Granted, I like this in Dark Souls. I like the weapons in Dark Souls. I really enjoy Dark Souls. Just in terms of my game design, I think I would prefer the quality approach of weapon design. And honestly, I prefer Bloodborne's weapons anyway. To the quantitative approach of weapon design where you just have a lot of them. So that's what I'm going for. I'm going to have a few weapons that are all pretty unique and different. The way I'm going to make weapons unique and different is essentially having each weapon have its own gimmick of gameplay. Along with its own unique attack strings and attack combos, it will also have a unique sort of system or gimmick around each weapon. So the sword and the shield is the most basic one, and the gimmick with this is mobility. I am, of course, painfully aware that making a sword and shield where its gimmick is going fast doesn't really make sense, because you have a shield, so it should probably be blocking. But don't worry about that. I mostly was just kind of thinking of Monster Hunter Sword and Shield, and I was kind of basing it off that as the base, very basic starter weapon before I get an idea of what else other weapons can be. So it is definitely a derivative of that game, but I like the Sword and Shield in Monster Hunter. I think it's a fun attack. So the idea behind the Sword and Shield in my game is you have your surface inputs, and you also have the control stick inputs. The gimmick being with Sword and Shield's usage of weaponry is that it has a lot of mobility and movement options, while other weapons may have you staying in a similar place or not really moving around a whole lot, or having a lot of your movement relegated to your actual movement and not your attacks. With the sword and the shield, your movement is controlled by your attacks a lot of the time. So you have a lot of attacks that run forward or launch you into the air or dive you left or right. That's really the main thing I wanted to go for the sword and shield. You're doing a whole lot of mobility options as you're attacking and as you're moving. You're dodging to the sides with your weapon. You're doing backflips. You're doing things of this nature. The sword and the shield's gimmick is go fast, which is also my gimmick. In the future, I'm not sure what other weapons I would like to add, but I would like to get a lot more creative than just a sword and a shield. I think a chainsaw weapon would be pretty fun. I think gun weaponry that you don't have to aim but it has an organic targeting system based on your attack strings would be really fun. I think a big heavy rock that you bash enemies in the skull with would be fun. I think just your zangled fists. Just punch things. Actually, that is not a joke. I really want to add a melee system, attack, combat, input system for unarmed combat, because I always find when that is an option in the games, it's really fun. It's really fun to use and it's really unique. So I think a game brawler option would be probably an attack that I'm going to be adding. But those are for future updates, once I finally finished all the animations for this update. Ooh. And that is it for this devlog. As you can probably see, I had a very fun time animating weapon attacks. I had originally not planned to do all of the on-ground attacks this week. I was only going to do a few of them and implement them and then see how those worked. But I had a really good time animating. I think, given my personal arc, I originally didn't like doing attack animations because I hadn't had much practice with them. And then in this devlog, I got more practice with them and really had a fun time animating them. And I went, as always, a bit overboard, and I made too many. So I had a very fun time animating all of my attacks, and it was a good time. I liked animating. I'm also a fan of how they work in game. I'm saying at the point where I haven't tested them in game, but I'm just going to trust that I enjoyed how they looked in game. Wow, I liked when I did the dive attack into the spin combo. That sure was poggers. If you have any suggestions for any fun weapon combos you would like to see in the future, comment. In the next week's developments, I'm probably going to work more on combos for sword and shields. I need to work on the combos for specific state functions like sliding, or for attack combos in air, because there currently isn't really many attack combos in air. The second you enter the aerial state, you don't have any attacks, so I need some for that. So I'm probably going to do that next week, or work on blocking, or work on different attacks. Question mark? Exclamation mark? Who's to say?